Today we finish up chapter 4, and if you haven't noticed, the sections toward the back of most of the chapters that we're going to cover will have will be about graphical methods or GUIs, and we're slowly going to get to the point where we're making interesting interactive GUIs. So today we're going to continue talking about that. So this is GUI part 2. We're going to get to the point of doing things with graphics and dealing with events. Alright, first, graphical objects are in the book. What they use to implement this is they have panels. We're going to use J panels. We've used that as before for organizing things, but now we're going to see where we can actually draw stuff on those. So it's not just in an applet that we can do that, but also in a regular application. The book, there are different approaches to doing this, and the book's approach, which I'm going to follow, and in the projects we'll do the same thing, but you may see different ways of doing that once you get out of this class. But their approach to do that is they create like some sort of a class that implements or that extends a J panel, and then that itself is like a panel, and then they add components to it and build the GUI around that panel. And then when they're through building it, then they'll have another class that's a main method. The main method will create a frame, and then they'll create an object of that other class that they created, and then add that to the J frame. And I'm going to go over lots of examples today, so we'll see those. The constructor in this J panel class that they create, the one that extends the J panel class, sets up the details, so the background color and other details, instantiating the different objects that are going to be used in the GUI. And then there will be a paint component method in there, and that is functions like the paint method in applets. It takes a graphics object, and then you have that graphics object, and you can use that to draw lines and rectangles and things just like you drew in the applets. So now I want to show a couple of examples of that they show in the book. The first one is the smiling face. In this smiling face panel, you'll notice that they import these packages that we didn't use the same packages when we were doing applets, but we are using some of the same ones, like the AWT and then the J panel in the swing class. So you'll notice that the very first thing is a public class smiling face, which is similar to the class definitions that we've done so far, but then it says extends J panel. Like in the applets it said extends J applet. So this one extends a J panel, which you'll learn in your next class, 163, all about inheritance. What we're doing here is we're inheriting from a J panel. So it's not important that you know all about that, but I just want you to understand that what that means in this case is you can treat this class now as if it is a J panel. Okay, so this actually is a J panel, but we're just putting some additional things into it. So for instance, they are creating a couple of constants in here that give it the base point for this head that they're going to draw. We can change where that's going to show up. And then they do some extra things in the constructor than is done in the J panel, and they do some things in this paint component. There is a paint component in the J panel class that does things like painting the background and that sort of thing, and we're just adding to it here. So that's what this super.paint component means, is it says, well, go do those things that are in the J panel class, but then in addition to that, let's do these things down here, everything that appears down here. So for instance, I set it to yellow. I set the color to yellow here using this this graphics object that's passed as a parameter, and then I draw and fill some ovals. He's drawing some eyes and pupils and nose and mouth and some other things. And at the very bottom, he does the drawstring. Now notice that everything he does in here is sort of like what you did at the project. He takes the base X and Y and then adds and subtracts to that to draw these different things. It allows it to be moved. So that's the J panel. And then the smiling face class, that's my class that just has the main method in it, and it creates a frame and puts smiling face in the title bar of that, sets the default close operation, and then we instantiate an object of that smiling face panel class that we created over here, this smiling face panel class that extended the J panel. So I create an object of that class, and then I add it to the content pane of the frame, and I pack it and set it to visible, and that's it. And then I should just be able to run the main method from here, and it'll create a frame with this panel that's in there that has all those things drawn on it. And you can, I invite you guys to play around with that. Go ahead and get in here and change this base X and base Y and watch to see how that changes, and have fun with it, basically. Alright, the next example that they have is a little bit more extensive. This one uses some circles it draws some circles, and it basically defines 5 different circles of the circle class. And the circle class is another class that they created that doesn't really do very much. It's just something that contains a diameter, so an X and Y, and the diameter that pretty much determines a circle, right, where it's positioned and how big it is, and then also a color. And then in the constructor, you can pass the size, which goes into diameter, and the color, and upper X and upper Y. Now, the way the authors in the book do this is they use different names for these things than the instance variables, which I'm very happy about. But I would prefer, look, size may refer to something else, okay? So this is really something that's going into diameter. So I think it makes more sense to just call it P diameter. And this could be called P color, because it relates to those other things, right? This is it's gonna take this P parameter and it's going to assign it to the parameter, and the color, and it's going to assign it to color. I think this makes much more sense. I mean, in general, I defer to the book. The authors are great. The book's great. I think I think it's wonderful, but I just think this is much more understandable. Having written a lot of programs in my life, this makes a lot more sense to me. Then I know there's a relationship between P diameter and diameter. Okay, now in the there's a draw method. This is just something that they wrote, right? So they have a draw method that takes a graphics object. So somebody is going to pass a graphics object to this method, and then it's going to use that to set the color to whatever the color is that is an instance variable of this object, and then it's going to fill an oval at this location using that diameter, and the diameter is used for the width and the height, right? Okay, and then they have a bunch of set methods. So they got set X, set Y, set set diameter, get diameter. They have get methods for all this stuff, and that's pretty much the whole class. Really not that much to it. The main things is that it has these instance variables, that it has this constructor. There you set up these things, and it has this draw method. Now watch what happens when they actually use this. And they create 3 objects of that class, circle 1 through circle 5. In the constructor, this is where they instantiate those things. So circle 1 is instantiated as a circle that has a diameter of 30. Its color is going to be red, and its location is 70, 35. The second one has a little bit bigger one, bigger diameter, and it's green, and it has a different location, and so forth. So look for a big blue one. Okay, that's the biggest one. It's got a diameter of 100, and it looks like the red one is going to be the smallest one. So when we actually run that, let's keep our eye open for that. And it sets the preferred size for this panel to 200 by 300, 300 by 200, sorry, and sets the background color to black. Alright, and in the paint component, watch what happens here. Remember, this takes a parameter that is a graphics object, and so I take that parameter and I use that. Well, first of all, what they do is they call the paint component method of the JPanel class, and then they call the draw method for each one of these circles and pass it that parameter. So in the draw method over here, we were wondering where this was coming from. Well, it's actually coming from this paint component, and it's passing it the same graphics object that it got from there. So let's take a look at this one. Oh, and then the main method is just like in the other one, where we create the frame, set the default close operation, add a new splat panel. Here they don't name it, they just create one on the fly. So that's something I invite you to take a look at. Compare that to the other one, the smiling face, where they create a new one, give it a name called panel, and then add it. In this case, in the splat method, they just forgo this step of creating it and giving it a name, and they just say, alright, well, I'm just going to say new splat panel. So I don't have a name for it or anything, but who cares? It just creates a new one and then sends it to the content pane of the frame. Right, packet, set visible, and I'm all done. So let's take a look at that main method, see how that one works. And here we go. See, there's that big blue cyan one and the little red one, and the other ones are in between. So all of these are represented by actual objects. Those objects contain the diameter, the location, and the color. And then when we call the draw method, it actually gives us a visual representation of those things. Cool, huh? Alright. So those are graphical objects. Moving on to the next topic is actually building a GUI. So objects, when we actually create GUI, we have different objects that we use. Components that we've seen, those are things that are used to interact with the user. So today we're going to talk about buttons and text boxes. Later on in the semester we'll talk about check boxes and radio buttons and things like that. So the other thing that are included in a GUI are events. These are things that just happen. Somebody clicks on something, they type something in, they may move a slider control or something like that. Those are all events that take place. There could be user actions, but there could be other things like a timer. You could have a timer that goes off after a certain number of seconds, and you may have noticed that when you're ordering something on the web and it says you've got 10 seconds to complete this transaction, otherwise we can't hold it any longer. Okay, and then we also set up listeners, and listeners are designed to just sit there and wait, and when an event takes place, the listener will say, well, is that an event that I'm interested in because you programmed it that way? And if it is, then it fires it fires this event, and then you will write the code that will react to that sort of thing. I mean, they click on a button, and so it may prompt you to go open a file or something. We'll see. Alright, so the process is you use the constructor to instantiate and to set up the components. Then we'll implement a listener class, and then in the listener class, in the action performed, we're going to establish the relationship. So when they click on this button, we'll do this sort of thing. Not right away, but that's eventually what we're going to do. Alright, so as an example, we'll start with the buttons. When somebody clicks a button. So we've all seen those things. It has a label, and it reacts. When somebody clicks on it, it makes it look like somebody's actually pushing a button, but it fires an event that we do something with. In the book, the way they implement these things is they will have an inner class. Okay, so in everything we've been doing so far, we create a new class, and then the file that contains that class just has that class in it, nothing else. But now we're going to create inner classes, which means it's a class within another class. And we do this because we don't really need to create a separate file for this. It's only going to be used this one time. Usually with classes, we want to design them in ways that they can be used by other objects and other classes. But an inner class is usually something that it's only going to be used in this other class, so we just put it right inside of it. And that's going to implement an interface. That's sort of like what we were talking about with the JPanels, where something extended a JPanel. That's called inheritance. This is called an interface, where it implements an interface. And all that means is it forces us to put a method in there, or several methods. Different interfaces will require certain methods. And so it's sort of like restricting us. When we say it implements an interface, it says, okay, well, if you're going to implement that interface, then you have to implement the methods that are in part of that interface. In the case of like the action listeners that we're going to be implementing, those require an action performed method. And the action performed method is where we're going to put the code that reacts to the the actions that have taken place. So that's where we're entering the commands to perform certain actions. And so we're going to take a look at the push counter class here, the push counter panel class, that is going to implement a button, a J button. And now that we're actually working with events, we have to implement the class java.awt.event. So note, I explained this earlier in the semester, but you can import java.awt.star, but in addition to that, you also have to import the package JWT or awt.event separately. Just by having awt.star does not include this one, so you have to do that separately. And then we'll also need some things from the swing class or the swing package, in particular JButton and JLabel. So this class extends the JPanel like the other ones, and we've got a couple instance variables. One is just a plain old int, and we're going to use that to count how many times somebody has pushed the button. And then we'll have a JButton object called push and a JLabel called label. The label is where we're going to inform the user of how many times they've pushed this button. Okay, so in the constructor, we set our count to 0. We instantiate this button object, so we just say that's equal to a new J button. And then we also associate it with this class that we're going to create. The class that we're going to create down at the bottom, you can see it down here peeking out, is going to be called button listener. That's just a name that the authors gave to it. When you create your own inner classes, you can call them whatever you want. So what we're saying is associate with this push button, with this button, the action listener class button listener. And as a matter of fact, that does implement an action listener interface, and we need to implement that in order to add it as the action listener. Java will not let us add an action listener that doesn't implement this action listener, because what that does is, because I'm implementing that, that's going to force me to put in an action performed. So now Java knows that this class will definitely have an action performed method. We're guaranteeing that. Why? Because it implements an action listener. And if we're going to put an object in here, it has to have an action. It has to implement the action listener. So we're guaranteed that it has an action performed. Okay, sorry, that sounds circular, but I want you to think about that, and we'll talk about it during class too. All right, so then the next thing is we wanted to instantiate this JLabel, and all that really does is has some text in it. The text is just going to be the text pushes, and then I'm going to concatenate that with count, which is the number of times it's been pushed. So that'll start out at 0. And then I add these two things. That adds them to the panel. I don't have to have something dot add here, because remember, this is a JPanel, and since it's a JPanel, there's an add method already inside of it, so I just call that add method. And I add the button and the label, and set the preferred size and the background, and that's it. Then in this inner class, this button listener class that we create, that we're forced to create an action performed, this is where I want to increment that count. So this adds 1 to count. So it starts out at 0. So if I push it once, it becomes 1. If I push it again, it adds 1 more to it, so it becomes 2, and so forth. Right? It keeps track of how many times you're pushing the button. And then every time I push it, I have to update it so that the user can see that. So I set the text to pushes, and then concatenate that with count. And then the push counter class, just like we've seen before, creates the frame, sets the default close operation, adds the new push counter panel to that thing, packs it, sets it to visible. Alright, and let's see it actually run. Very small, but you can see it. It's set the background color to cyan. I've got this button. That label is over here. It just says pushes and has a 0 in it. If I push this, when I push that, it executed this action performed. So it added 1 to count, and then it reset the text. So then it said pushes to 1. If I push it again, it updated this again, sets it to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, however many times you want. I'm going to kill that. So that's buttons. The last example they have involves text fields. Text fields can also react to user input, and in particular, when you hit the enter button and you're inside of a text box, that will fire an event, and it will fire an action performed, or an action event, and we'll see how we react to that in just a second. So text fields just allow users to enter text, change it, whatever, and in the program, if you want to get and set that text, you use the get text and set text methods to do that. And we'll see how they also use integer parseInt to convert that. So that's implemented in a class, in a class called Fahrenheit. So we have Fahrenheit panel, and this once again extends the J panel, and the instance variables that we're going to use here are we're going to use 3 different labels, and then a text field. The text field is where we're going to type in the Fahrenheit, and then the labels are where we're going to show the output and the results. Okay, so the input label and the output label are just static labels where we just put some text in there, like enter Fahrenheit temperature, and then this is showing us that the temperature in Celsius is going to be here. The result label is where we're actually going to put in the Celsius temperature when it's converted. All right. The Fahrenheit field, we're going to create a new text field, and we instantiate it here, and then after we create that text field, we're going to add action listener, and the action listener we're going to create is temp listener. Remember, the other one was button listener. In this case, we're going to call it temp listener, but it implements the same action listener interface. Alright, and then after I've instantiated those things, I just add them all here, set the preferred size, and set the background color. Now, I do want to point out that we're going to use text boxes quite a bit in this semester, and you don't need to add action listeners for all of those. You only add action listeners when you want to respond to something. So if you have some text boxes where people are putting their names and addresses and things like that, and we don't want to respond to that. We want to respond to the button where they say, okay, submit this information or something. Well, then you don't need to add those action listeners to all those different text boxes. It's only when you want to respond to events. All right, so now let's look at how we implemented this action performed method. In this case, I have a couple of temporary variables. Here I've got, or not temporary variables, but local variables, and where I temporarily store the Fahrenheit temperature that the user put in, right? Because that's going to be a text, and I want to convert that to an int. And then once I get that, I can convert that to the Celsius temp, and then that's what I'm going to put into the text box for results. All right, so here I get the text from the Fahrenheit text field, and I put that into something just called text. Then I convert that into an int by using the integer.parseInt. Then once I convert that, the formula for converting Fahrenheit to Celsius is Fahrenheit minus 32 times 5/9. Alright, so that calculates the Celsius temp, and then I've got to inform the user of that. So I convert that into a string, and then I call the setText method, which puts it into that label. Alright, and this class again just creates a frame, close operation, adds a panel to it, and then packs it and sets it to visible. Alright, run it. And this frame, so if I want to put in it's 50 degrees, and then I hit the enter, that fired that event here that executed all these things, converted that temperature, and then put it into this label down here. So I can have it happen again. Type in 60, and that changes the temperature to 15, and so forth. So that's pretty much it for today. One last thing I wanted to tell you guys about is that there are stories at the end of each of the chapters. They're called software failure stories, and they're just kind of interesting thing. They're only like a page or so, and starting with chapter 2, I would take a look at these as you're going along. Just, if you got a couple of minutes on the bus and you got nothing else to do, just read these stories, get familiar with them. on the final exam, and maybe even on the midterm exam, we may have some questions, just really simple questions about, what is it, what was the failure, and what did they do about the failure, that sort of thing. So I would just get a little bit familiar with those things. So that's it. I will see you guys in class, and we'll practice some of